Hello and welcome to 18 WJTS in.form. Tonight's show is going to be continued again tomorrow. It's a two-part series with SWICAC, and Tammy Lampert is joining us to talk about how to protect your children from predators with advice from predators, which is kind of unusual. Tammy, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's talk about, this is a program, a training that SWICAC, you and a detective will go to an organization, a school, a group, and make a presentation about how to protect your children from predators with the advice of predators. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the training is actually called Protecting Your Children Advice from Child Molesters, and it was developed by Corey Jewel Jensen with CBI Consulting, and she is a national phenomenon to where she has over 35 years experience of working with sex offenders, and during the work with the sex offenders and the treatment and the counseling and things like that, they also developed programming where the sex offenders themselves gave their tricks and trades, if you will, as to how they seduce adults and children and how they pick their victims and what they do to keep their victims from telling.
And this presentation you do is based on slides that you show, and we're going to go through not the entire series and not necessarily the series in the order you would do this training, but this show will be 2 nights, tonight and tomorrow night on 18 WJTS in.form. So let's get started with your program.
Yeah, so recently SWICAC and local law enforcement have been trained to be able to provide this training to the communities with the goal of educating the adults, because it is the adults' responsibility to keep kids safe, and to also, through that education, hopefully prevent the child from further abuse or from that child molester abusing more children. And so we're super excited about it, and we're ready to enroll it into the community. And they can contact SWICAC if they would like for that to be presented to their group. Right now, like I said, all the staff of SWICAC and then local law enforcement, some detectives and investigators are trained to help present this training to the community.
Okay. Well, let's have the I guess not necessarily the first slide, but one of the slides. This is the kind of training we'll see. Yes,
and so I definitely didn't pick out like the highlights or anything, so the overall whole training is very beneficial. The training comes with videos of actual sex offenders explaining as to, you know, how they got away with it for as long as they did and things like that. So the entire training is at least 2.5 hours long. But there's some things that I think we would be able to educate the community on our program here today. So, I just want to say that, like, whenever we look at the Child Advocacy Center, I know a lot of times we talk about how we provide a safe, child-friendly location for kids of abuse to come. I have a slide that I wanted to share that shows, you know, how the team, the agencies, the investigation circle the child as opposed to the child having to go to multiple places and talk to so many different people. And so this slide's one of my favorites because it gives a visual of that. Okay. And then there's a pre-test that we do in which we ask questions of, you know, how do sex offenders, how do they get away with it? Do they always commit the same kind of crimes, or are they different crimes? How many crimes do they commit before they actually even get caught? And those are questions we ask the group to kind of explain maybe everyone's being naive of how this actually works. And so one of the things that I think always surprises the groups is that sex offenders usually have 120 to 200 criminal acts before they're even caught or before someone tells. And that could be 120 different children, or it could be 120 different acts on one child or several children. Okay. And so I always think that that's something that shocks the group whenever we tell them that.
Shocks me, yes.
Yeah, so what do you think about that? About those numbers?
That's surprising. Yes.
Yeah, it's very surprising. And so another thing that I like to always point out is they're not truthful. You know, we have statistics that show if you ask a sex offender the average number of victims pre-polygraph, and a polygraph is the machine, and it's an expert that is way out of my field, that goes through and measures the body's reaction and those kinds of things during the questioning. And so pre-polygraph, sex offenders usually say they have an average of 2.9, so 2 or 3 victims. Post polygraph, that number goes up to 11.6. So it quadruples.
Wow. Again, another interesting.
Yeah.
Surprising.
And so the other thing that is usually kind of a shock to people is that a lot of sex offenders started abusing as children. And so a lot of them, like I said, pre-polygraph, they would say they've been doing this since they were an adolescent, would be 27%. But in actuality, post-polygraph, it is up to 76%. So 76% of sex offenders were abusing other children when they were adolescents as well. The other thing is when you talk to your kids about abuse. And so this is always one of my favorite subjects to cover, as you know, you talk to your kids about helmet safety, you talk to them about bike safety, you talk to them about tornado drills, fire drills, all those things. So why wouldn't you talk to them about body safety? And, you know, and making sure that they know that nobody should do something not okay. You know, whenever you think about how sometimes parents will say the stranger danger, or you know, or single out particular groups of people that shouldn't do something, it's like training your child when they cross the street to only look for yellow buses or yellow cars, if you think about it that way. It should be, when you're crossing the street, you should be aware of and watch for all the cars out there, not just certain ones. And so that's one of the things covered in the training as well, is, you know, red flags and signs and things like that to look for. And also how to talk with your kids in that comfortable manner, to where, in all honesty, the adults are what make it uncomfortable. If they're comfortable and they can talk to the child the same as they talk to him about fire safety and helmet safety, it's not going to be uncomfortable or a big deal to the kid. And if something happens, they're going to go tell, because they've been talked to about it. They've been explained that it's not their fault. And so they're much more likely to tell if that conversation's been had. You want to keep going?
Yes, keep going.
All right.
Keep going with some of the, what this is really the training, the parts that people will get during the training.
And we like feedback in our training, so if you have any questions while we're going through, please tell me.
All right.
Or ask me, I guess. You know, and then some other things that the offenders do to discredit the children, or to kind of, they get on the offense to where if they accidentally touch someone, they will go and tell, you know, the other parent, hey, you know, she's probably going to come tell you something. We were wrestling around and I accidentally touched her vagina. And that is the offender playing the offense, to where then when the kid does come and say, hey, you know, he touched me somewhere not okay. Oh yeah, he told me about that. It was just an accident. It was just a misunderstanding. But then we always ask the group, how many times do you accidentally touch someone else in a not okay area?
Right.
Like, it's just, it's absurd. Some of the other, you know, quotes from the sex offenders is that it just happened. The child didn't say no, which again, we're talking about children, you know, and the adults should be keeping them safe. So for the way that they rationalize their behavior, the way that they view the child as more of a partner, is that manipulation in there with the child, with the abuse. And so those are some of the topics we cover as well. I wanted to make sure that, like, you know, when we talk about how how research and statistics show us, they show that an average of 1 in 25 males is a sex offender. And so if you think about that, everybody knows 25 males.
Oh, yeah.
And therefore, everyone knows a sex offender, you know. And we have to get rid of, you know, it's stranger danger, it's someone we don't know, or that we would know if the person was a sex offender, because they're very good at hiding it. And so during this presentation, our forensic interviewer pulled some statistics for us so that we could show in our local area how our statistics are. So these statistics are from 2018, and again, they usually surprise people to know that when we look at the relationship of the offender with the child, 35% of the alleged perpetrators are a significant other or friend of a parent. 35%. 25% are a biological parent. 8% is a step parent. And then you have another relative, so aunt, uncle, grandma, grandpa, things like that is 21%. And stranger was less than 1%.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's surprising numbers.
They are surprising numbers because a lot of times people don't think someone they know would do this. And that's what we need to overcome. We need to overcome thinking that we're going to be able to just look at somebody and know if they're a sex offender. And we also need to overcome thinking that we don't know anybody that would do this. And by overcoming that and addressing it and being educated on it, we can impact the rate of abuse. I mean, we can believe the children whenever they tell us. We can report it whenever we see something that's not okay. And then in the end, prevent additional trauma to that current victim and hopefully prevent future victims.
And really, this is all just to make people aware. The more you know, the old G.I. Joe, the more you know, it's important.
It is very important. And through awareness and education, I mean, we can then prevent abuse. And so, I mean, when you think about it, that's huge. You know, I go back to, you know, sex offenders are really good at what they do. They don't want to hurt the child because if they hurt the child's more likely to run and tell. You know, the children, 95% of children know their abuser, are close to them, have some type of relationship with them. And the closer that relationship, the harder it is for the child to tell. You know, I think another misconception, we always joke about it and say it's like the CSI effect. You know, a lot of these cases, the kids don't tell right away. So there's not physical evidence as you see on the TV shows and things like that. And just because there's not physical evidence doesn't mean that we should discredit that it didn't happen. Because more times than not, it's a delayed disclosure. The child tells quite some time after the abuse had even occurred. I know I refer to the statistic a lot, but I think it's powerful that there's over 42 million adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. And, you know, a good portion of them never told anyone. We have a lot of adult survivors of childhood abuse that didn't tell till they were adults. Some didn't tell till 50 years after the abuse had happened. And so if you think about trying to think that there's going to be physical evidence for something that has been happening or happened a year ago or 6 months ago, it's just not going to be there. You know, some tips too is that we cover that don't let sex offenders be alone with children. If they've been accused, if they've been convicted, don't let them alone. We joke about, you know, if you have somebody who is the treasurer for an organization and they embezzled money, would you then want them to be the treasurer for another organization? You know, it's the exact same thing. If they've been accused of or convicted of molesting a child, don't let them around other children. I think there's a misconception sometime that, well, you know, it was this age or it was a male or it was a female, so therefore they wouldn't do that to another child, and that's not true at all. There's a lot of crossover studies that show, you know, you have some sex offenders that have their type that they like, but then you also have to where sex offenders will cross over into different age groups and different genders. And so I think that the safest thing we can do for our kids, don't let them be around them. I know that, like, I should, you know, I always want to say, I know that the topics that we cover are very heavy and they're, could have some triggers and stuff. So I want to make sure that if anyone is affected by, you know, learning this information or it brings up any type of traumatic experiences from before, they talk to somebody, they get help. And there's help out there, you know. Crisis Connection does a great job with, you know, victims, and so they can always reach out to them if they need any type of support and resource. The other thing is that if you suspect that a child is being abused or neglected, report it. It's better to be safe than sorry. Report it. You don't have to have the proof that it happened. You know, just reason to believe that something could have happened, that suspicion. And so again, I want to make sure that we say that, you know, if you have reason to believe that a child's been abused or neglected, to report it to your local law enforcement and also to the Department of Child Services hotline, which is 800-800-5556.
So you should dual report.
Absolutely. Every time.
Okay, and we're going to go over more of these slides in this presentation. And again, this is just part of the presentation of the training that you will do. It takes about 2.5 hours for a group, an organization, a school, and they contact SWICAC?
Yes, they can contact SWICAC in order to ask for the presentation to be done for, and we want it to be only for adults because it is a lot of heavy content.
It's very uncomfortable.
It is very uncomfortable. Yes. Yeah.
Well, Tammy, thank you. We're gonna stop you here because in the interest of time, but we'll continue the show again tomorrow night, as we will talk with Tammy Lampert with SWICAC. She's the director of SWICAC, about a training that is available for you about how to protect your children from predators, with advice from predators. So there we go. Tammy, thank you very much for being with us. Please join us again tomorrow night right here on 18 WJTS. We are local people watching local people.